thank you, I want to say, for doing this. It's so nice of you to join me here for a conversation about this book. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a great experience reading it the first time, and I think the second time it was even more of an emotional experience for some reason. But um I love the topics discussed, and I love, the opportunity to speak about it. So
Like, can I say you're a mother and psychology enthusiast?
sure. Call myself an armchair psycho on TikTok. That's a joke about being an armchair psychologist because I talk about mental health and social issues on there sometimes. But you can, I don't know. Do you need a title? You can call me a mother.
Can I say you're a mother and psychology enthusiast?
Sure. Yeah. Or
Okay.
amateur, either one.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And you can speak for as long as you want. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
Right. So, Love Before COVID, this book came out in 2021. You read it then, and you've said you recently read it again this year. So, first question, I guess, is how does this book make you feel?
I think the overarching feeling was like outrage and um, confusion, outrage, and like there's a little bit of a feeling of like the reality of human relations kind of dawn on you, and you realize there's sometimes really no solution to some problems.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was kind of an all pervasive feeling throughout the book.
Okay. So, does this book to you seem like it's just a story about the characters and their psychology, or did it seem like it was saying something larger about like society or the culture wars or something like that? What did you think?
For me, it really talks about human nature and how people innately have different values and how hard it is to reconcile those things. And um, it's really about relationships, I think. And I feel so strongly that almost anyone can relate.
Okay. Did you feel like the book was like siding with any particular ideas or politics, or did you think it was kind of neutral?
I thought it did a great job of looking at both sides and bringing them to the extreme so that you can sort of, gain a bigger perspective of what each participant might be feeling. But I mean, it clearly sided against, violence and being unnecessarily pushy with the people that we care about.
Okay. So the book opens in Leicester in 2002 with young Joe and Janet. And Joe is about to break up with Janet. And at this point in his life, he's quite good looking. He looks like Marlon Brando in the 50s. He's quite hunky. He's got an intelligent girlfriend called Janet, who he's breaking up with because she's been recently diagnosed by Dr. Adams as a psychopath. But the paradox is she kind of seems like a good girlfriend, even though she's a psychopath. What did you think?
The first time I read it, I was just wondering, is she really a psychopath or was it an accident? And I think in the second version, I was really sure she was a psychopath. And God, it felt so unfair. It felt so unfair the way he treated her because it was like I felt set up because we expect psychopaths to act the way that Joe acted.
Interesting. So did you think she actually was a good girlfriend for him?
I think they're compatible, but I don't know whether or not someone is good or bad for you is I don't know, that's a hard thing to say.
Okay. So when she was being dumped in that first scene and really trying to, repair the relationship, do you think she was displaying like likable qualities or do you think she was displaying like red flags?
Hmm. It's hard because in one sense you're supposed to fight for relationships, but in another sense you shouldn't be pushy with people who want to have boundaries with you. Um, I don't know. I think it's really natural to fight for a relationship when someone's breaking up with you if you really feel that you're good for each other.
Hmm. So it sounds like she was kind of just looking human, really.
She definitely looked human, yeah. And I would go as far to say that most psychopaths are pretty human, even though they do sometimes messed up things.
Okay. So early on in the book, before she stabs Joe in the eye, did you find her a sympathetic character, even though she was a psychopath?
Absolutely. Yeah, I did. I feel like that's true in real life too. So when you're reading the book, you don't really know how much of that is cultivated. And I, as I was reading, I was feeling like, am I being tricked or not? But regardless of whether or not she was manipulative or straight, I felt she had some really good points, and it was hard to disagree with her.
Okay. So that's how the book opens. Then we go a year and a half later to 2004 in the summer in St. Martin Square outside of Stone's the Cafe. They're meeting up again because it's been a year and a half since they broke up. Jody Green, Joe's mother's been diagnosed with cancer. Joe's gained a lot of weight. He asked Janet to meet with Jody during her final weeks of life. They're both talking at Stone's in front of St. Martin's Square. So Joe and Janet start to have this heated argument about Joe's mother. Janet's angry at Joe for forgiving his mother. And the argument spirals out of control. She says that Jody was abusive and horrible, and there's no way that Joe should love someone like that. And Joe says, she's my mother. I want to be compassionate. I want to forgive her. I want to be with her while she's dying. It doesn't matter if she deserves it. And this argument gets so heated between them that Janet gets so angry that she stabs Joe in the face with a fork and she blinds him. Really, after that, he's got an eye patch. You can only see in one eye. So when
Yeah,
this happened and she ran away, what did you think of Joe and Janet as a couple? And did this change your perception of Janet?
it was really surprising, but I was set up to not really know if she was going to do these kinds of things or not. I was mad at her because and confused when somebody's personality changes so drastically. Um, that convinced me that okay, she kind of was lying this whole time. But then there was that aspect where you think that she has a greater purpose for why she's acting this way, and then she loses control, and then you can't side with her after that. But it feels to me like it's natural for people to have these kind of arguments, and not maybe not okay, but really common for people to lash out at each other physically. Um, and obviously, I didn't like it, but I don't know. It was crazy. It was like a spinning whirlwind, really. Uh, and you just kind of get confused, and you're like, "What's Joe gonna do now?"
What did you think of the fact that he lied to the police and said a person on drugs randomly did it, and he did everything he could to protect her so that she basically got off scot-free?
I don't know. Joe was really forgiving throughout the entire book, and a lot of times it makes you really angry because you're like, "Stop that!" Maybe in that scenario, I can't take a hard stance against what he did for Janet, but at the same time, she's not wrong about how forgiving he is because, like, you have to have good boundaries, and if people don't have repercussions for the things that they do to each other, how are they going to change? But Janet already probably knew what she did wrong, and maybe she needed to be locked up. I don't know. I don't know if she hurts anyone else when Joe's not around, but um, I don't know. Yeah, I do get angry at Joe throughout the book.
Okay. So before that happened, before she violently poked his eye out, they were having this argument where she was trying to convince him that he shouldn't love or forgive his mother, even though
Yeah.
she was dying. And Joe was saying, no, I want to be compassionate. I want to love people unconditionally, even if they don't deserve it. And Janet was saying, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't love people unconditionally. Even your mother, you shouldn't love her again. She's a horrible cunt. Who did you side with in that argument?
I don't know. I don't want to say I sided with anyone, but like for me personally in my life, I know people who do the kinds of things that Joe's mother does, and I can't. I don't want to say I can't forgive them. I forgive them. I just would never give them an out. And so Janet has this point throughout the entire book that she's like, unconditional love isn't real love, and you should never love anyone that way. And I don't really think she's wrong, but I also don't think Joe is wrong. It's really a dichotomy of like risk versus reward. There's a balance to community versus individual feelings, and it's never an easy it's never an easy issue to solve. But for me personally, I wouldn't have forgiven her, and I agree with Janet. Fuck his mom.
Okay. So personally, you would side with her, but you can have compassion for him in choosing to forgive his dying mother too.
Yeah, it's human nature to want that feeling of you may have done horrible things for me, but at the same time, we only have so many experiences in life, and some of those are made up of good experiences with people that we may not overarchingly support their behaviors, but they're still a huge part of who we are because we're not fully separate as humans. We kind of develop together. So,
Interesting. Yeah, that's quite a profound insight. So then we go 10 years into the future. We're in 2015. At this point, Joe has an eye patch, and now he's basically a fat man. He's not just gained weight. He's got horrible experiences in between with horrible relationships. And then he gets into a relationship with his second girlfriend, a dance instructor, who's really, really beautiful. Her name is Lorraine Klein. And she immediately, within the first few pages of hearing her speak, you understand that she really seems to hate fat people. So what did you think of Lorraine when she first came in the book?
she's so sadistic and she loves being vicious. It makes her feel good, and she's with someone who it gives her pleasure to be an asshole to. And she's so shallow and devoid of happiness, and she's a bitch. She might be as bad or worse than Janet. Maybe she's a psychopath too, or maybe she's a worse psychopath.
Interesting. So when you first kind of encountered it, do you think her opinion of her was formed quite quickly within like the first few pages of hearing her speak, or did it take a while for you to see her this way?
Uh, hmm. I'm trying to recall the pacing of the first few conversations between the two. I, my immediate feeling was that she's emotionally manipulative and dismissive of other people. Um, but pretty quickly, you start to feel disgusted at who she is.
Interesting. So, do you think she was the way she was in part because she was so beautiful?
Maybe there's like a subculture of like pageantry and pageant lifestyle, and it's kind of really superficial and super aggressive towards people as individuals. And like if you don't perform, you're a no one kind of thing. Um, I don't think so. I don't think it's because she's pretty. I think that probably it made it worse because she had that out that she could say, well, like, look at me. I'm of course I'm right. Look at my results.
Hmm. So, when we first meet Lorraine, the first conversation we see her having before she starts insulting fat people and insulting Joe, is she's talking about her father, and she's saying that she really didn't like growing up with her father because she felt like her father loved her unconditionally. And Joe's like, "What's wrong with that?" And she says, "Well, I feel like he didn't like me. Everything he did because he thought he should because I was his daughter, but he didn't like me and I wanted to be his friend." What did you think this said about her as a character?
Hmm. I think that might have been one of the more reasonable things that she was talking about. Um, it, I don't know. I don't know if that one said much to me about her other than the fact that like she had a father figure. She had a pretty good father figure. And I don't know, somehow that didn't translate into healthy relationships overall.
Interesting. So you didn't see her as like being damaged by her parents and then thinking, oh, this is why she is the way she is.
I certainly wouldn't have thought so what I felt like she was saying about her dad was that he was overjoyed about some things in life, but not really her. And I actually feel that that's really common. Not everyone is ecstatic about everything in life, and it's reasonable that she felt like that sucks, and that she wanted to bond more deeply with him, but she probably didn't really like him that much either. So
Hmm. And do you think maybe the reason he didn't bond with her is because she was kind of an unpleasant kid?
yeah, um, that's possible. I don't know. The book doesn't talk about it. There's a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah. So when she first starts to get at Joe for being big and needing to lose weight, she kind of doesn't do the normal thing of saying, I want you to lose weight because I want you to be healthier. She says, you know, your tummy's disgusting and it hangs out further than your erection, and you've got man boobs and you're like a woman and you're gross and you know, and just be a fucking man and stop eating all this nasty shit. She screams at him. What did you think of her approach to encouraging her boyfriend to lose weight?
There's so much to say about self-esteem and the way that damaged self-esteem causes poor behaviors in people in general. And she does seem like the kind of person who doesn't know that or care. But I don't know. I just saw her as being sadistic because I mean, it seems like maybe she actually liked that he was a disgusting pig to her. And she liked it because she can control him and she was trying to hurt his feelings.
Interesting. Why do you think she was going about it this way rather than like the more normal thing of saying, I want you to lose weight for your health?
I think she just hates herself.
So you think this comes back to her hating her own self?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I would guess. Other than the fact that it just seems like she enjoys hurting people, like that's what I understand about people who do these kinds of things. They're just really superficial and it's covering up this part of themselves that they just can't accept or love. And they don't feel like they're worth much. And they treat other people like they're not worth much either, so that they can bond with them over that feeling of helplessness. It helps them have an outlet for, how shitty they feel about themselves.
This is interesting. So in a roundabout way, then you see Lorraine as a character who's in pain.
I would say so. I can't imagine anyone acting that way if they're not, unhappy.
Okay, interesting. So after she really gives him what they call a bollocking in the UK for being overweight, she starts to attack his, yeah, she starts to attack his friends next. So she calls his friend Jill ugly, and then she really goes after his friend Claire because Claire is twice as big as he is. And then she starts to sort of tell you her philosophy of being fat. And she says being fat is selfish because it's your job when you have sex with someone to be hot so that people get aroused. And if you expect to have sex and you're not hot because you're eating too much, it's like you're not living up to your end of the bargain and you're being selfish and unfair and it's disgusting. Did you think she was right in the argument she gave, but why you
I
should
think
be
she's
thin?
crazy. Really crazy. I want to leave space to suggest that we all have different values and it's okay to have those. That was really the overarching feeling too, is how much of what this person values is wrong or right? And is it okay to say you value sexiness? To you, that's important. Is it wrong for anyone to point fingers and say your values are bad? Um, I don't really know if she believed any of those things, and maybe she did, but so one thing about socionics is it teaches you that some people really, really value the appearance of things versus how it feels to you.
Mhm.
Um, so I just try to leave space about that. some people really value that, and I think it's natural for some people. But it's also really messed up, the things that she was saying. Like, I feel like, there's you have to separate the disdain from the value,
Hmm.
and the disdain comes from, like, a deeper place, and it has a lot less to do with the people she's attacking.
Hmm. Well, there's one point at which Joe is defending his friend Claire, and he says she's one of the most giving people I know. And then Lorraine says, no, she's not. She wrecks her body with food and expects men to fancy her. That's like expecting people to fuck you even though you don't brush your teeth and you stink. Do you think Lorraine's right
Yeah.
about that or wrong?
Absolutely not. There are a lot of people who have lots of different preferences, and, I guess not everyone knows that, but most people do, so, uh, when people become full of shit because they're enraged, they just say crazy things, but I don't know. I I just think she's completely crazy.
You think Lorraine's completely crazy?
Yeah.
Do you think
It's
crazy in the sense of being a psychopath like Janet, or crazy in the sense of just being full of shit?
both, and, like, just having no emotional control and just feeling, like, out of control, and, like, I don't know. That's pretty much it, just, like, she's just flailing her emotions around and not thinking about anything logically.
Interesting. So you saw her as a very emotional kind of woman rather than like a very cutthroat, logical woman.
Yes, I did. Yeah. But I mean, you could see it the other way. You could see it as she's not in touch with her feelings, and that's why she has to project because she doesn't understand what she's feeling. You could see her as like an ESTJ type or like an ESFJ type,
Hmm.
but which one I don't really know. Probably an ESFJ. I would go with the ethical type first.
Interesting. So you see her as a feeler.
Maybe.
So another thing she says is after she says all this stuff about Joe and his friends, at one point he's like nearly in tears because she's insulted him so horrendously and insulted his friends. And then she says, Joe, I feel like you're trying to censor me. Like, how would you feel if I tried to censor you? Do you
Yeah. Meanwhile, she's
think,
censoring them.
do you think she had a
Yeah.
point?
No. No. I feel like she's accusing him of doing all the things that she's doing.
Interesting. So you think she censored him?
Yeah, she's like not allowing him to talk about his values or feelings.
Hmm, interesting. So she's projecting. Well, another thing that she says quite often is like, honesty is how I show my love. And if she's honest enough to show her love, then you should just take it, even if you don't like what she has to say. Do you think she's right about
Yeah.
it?
Well, it doesn't seem like love, really. I don't think, I mean, I don't know. All this stuff is like maybe a topic of like philosophy, but um, I think probably love is accepting and not like damaging. If it doesn't feel like love, maybe it isn't.
Interesting. So would you say for yourself, like, you wouldn't say honesty is how you show your love?
You can be honest in a nice way.
Hmm. And her problem is she
Yeah.
was honest in a nasty way.
All the time. But also, it is human nature sometimes to be an asshole, and that does exist. Like when people are not always conscious of the way that they're saying things. So like it's wrong to say things in a mean way, but people still do it.
Yeah, interesting. So another thing Lorraine says is, she says, being with a beautiful woman isn't easy. You have to be strong. Most men aren't strong enough, and that's why they don't get what you have, Joe. They settle for women they're not attracted to. Not like you. You've got me. So she's basically communicating to him that, like, he's really lucky to have someone so hot, but it's not easy. You have to be strong. Do you think she's
Yeah,
right about that?
I don't know, but Joe believes it, and that was the thing that I felt was upsetting because he really felt like, you know what, she's right. This is really what I want, and I have to make sacrifices if I want a hot woman. Um, I don't know whether that's right or wrong. Depends on the people involved. I think.
Hmm. But you felt kind of disturbed to see him think he should be treated like that because that's what you need to keep a hot woman.
Yeah, and the fact that he valued that enough to allow it.
Mm,
And one of their compromises was like, when we go out in public, people need to see that I have a hot woman. So if if that's what this is about, then play it up, or I'm not doing this. So
mm.
he kind of returned to the abuse a little bit.
Interesting. So there's a bit of a two-way nastiness in their relationship. It's not just coming from Lorraine.
Mostly Lorraine. Joe doesn't really want to hurt anyone usually.
Hmm. So did you think Lorraine was a vain woman?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, like I would say shallow.
Shallow.
Mhm.
So uh, do you think her concern for her appearance was a bad thing, or do you think it was a normal thing?
Um, I think in general it's okay if people care about aesthetics, but to take it to the extreme and maybe use it as a mask to hide over the more painful things that we deal with is probably not very good. Um, some people are extremely vain. I don't know. There's a balance, I think.
Okay.
I mean, in her case, it didn't seem healthy at all. It didn't seem like I don't I don't even know if she really felt that way or if it was just like a way to feel better about, you know, other nasty feelings she was having.
She kept saying over and over again that she was more beautiful than everybody else. Do you think
Yeah,
that's healthy?
absolutely not. I don't want to speak for other people. Real, I don't want to make a hard line in the sand about this, because I don't know. I don't really know what's healthy for everyone. But I would say, like in general, it doesn't seem healthy to care that much. I mean, yeah,
So if someone is really beautiful like she is, do you think in a roundabout way it's not so healthy for them to focus on that and maybe they should focus on other things about themselves?
yeah. So like, I noticed a long time ago, like I was saying earlier, the pageantry culture, it really objectifies people, and it places a lot of it. Not to say that objectification in general is bad, but there's a really toxic way that people can treat each other like commodities and things like that, which again is a normal part of human nature, but to an extreme, it's extremely damaging. And the more you focus on that, you lose sight of the more important things. I would
Mhm.
say. Again, I don't like putting hard lines in the sand about people in general about what's healthy, but I that's my instinct, but I don't really know.
Okay, fair enough. So when we get to the end of the first section of romance, so Joe is talking to himself, about the fact that Lorraine has hurt his feelings, but he also thinks he's lucky to be with her and they have a beautiful home together and they're gonna have beautiful children. Every man would be lucky to be with Lorraine and every man would be envious of him. He thinks he's really got something special because she's so beautiful. But he can't have sex with her because she hurt his feelings. So in order
Mhm.
to get an erection, he's got to watch his favorite porn star Davis McFarlane, who winds up becoming a big character in the next sections of the book. And it says that the reason he likes Davis and finds her so hot is because he thinks that she looks so arrogant when she's having sex. Why do you think he likes this?
Maybe there's a displaced sense of like not feeling self-assured in himself, and I think part of Joe also enjoys being degraded to as an extent. I don't know why he would like that. Maybe it reminds him of his mom.
Hmm. So you think there's maybe a connection between Davis and his own porn star mother that he's making subconsciously?
Yeah, there were times when I was like wondering if the last story was actually about Joe and if it was going to come together.
Interesting. So then we have the end of the first block of the book, the end of the romance story. We've got the two main women that are probably going to be the two main women in the rest of the book, Janet and Lorraine. So Janet is a psychopath, diagnosed as a psychopath, who stabbed Joe and disfigured him permanently for the rest of his life. Lorraine's beautiful, not a psychopath, never been violent as far as we know, but yet she seems kind of worse than Janet. What did you think?
I thought she was so much worse than Janet. There's so much you can say about how conscious a person is about like the damage they do to other people. And Janet was really conscious about this. It doesn't mean she wasn't a psychopath, but she was really responsible, I thought, about her effect on other people. And not only was she responsible about like holding her vicious instincts back, she was also proactive about trying to teach people how to be better.
Interesting. So, in a way, what do you think this says about mental health labels like psychopath?
Well, there's a difference between the clinical use and the societal opinions. Um, it'd be interesting. It would be nice if more people were educated about human nature in general, and um, I think it would be less damaging. People would. Not everyone cares, but if people did understand human nature and evolution, it would lead to. It's redundant to say, but it would lead to more understanding.
It's interesting. So it sounds like even though Janet might be a psychopath, you still find her a sympathetic character anyway.
Yes, yeah, but psychopaths don't they have that impression on us anyway, though?
Well, I've never seen a psychopath in a work of fiction who seems quite sympathetic before,
Mm,
or TV show or
yeah,
movie, matter.
I mean,
Or
she's
villain.
relatable. I feel like she's relatable, and I feel maybe I don't know. Well, so when you first meet a psychopath, legend has it that you really like them and you think they're a great person. And one thing I think about psychopaths is that they have a really strong um, core of their own values, and they value those much higher than society's values. So that can manifest in many ways.
Interesting. So maybe she's more likable than Lorraine, because although Lorraine is more normal, um, she's horrible maybe in ways that society is less likely to be scared of compared to like the way society is scared of psychopaths. What do you think about that?
Do you mind repeating that?
Sure. So maybe the reason that Lorraine seems worse than Janet is because although Lorraine does worse stuff, she does stuff that's less scary to people than what Janet does. Like it's less scary to people to just be horrible than it is to potentially stab someone's eyes out spontaneously.
Did Lorraine kill Joe's dog?
Yes, she did.
um, I don't know. And so when you frame it like that, as though there's a couple together and it happened and they both know it, it's there are so many things that people do that the community says, "Oh, we're just going to turn a blind eye. It's fine." And we all collectively agree that that person is still all right. Um, I think Lorraine could have easily been diagnosed as a psychopath.
Interesting. Okay. And that would have been interesting if she's a feeler.
Oh yeah, I think in socionics you could get that. Maybe less so in MBTI. But oh,
Int-
you're saying because psychopaths have like do they typically have shallow affect? Like they're not
Well, I mean, they're at least stereotypically supposed to be T rather than F.
oh, okay. Um
So if she is a psychopath, she'd be an interesting one.
yeah. Yeah, I think with psychopaths they have emotions. It's just it's so far they've suppressed their emotions so deeply.
hmm So then in the next part of the book, we go to Procreation, the story about Joe's neighbors, the lesbian couple Alice and Eve. And they've been together since they were 14, when Eve was suicidal and Alice looked after her because Eve got rejected by her family for being gay, and it was horribly traumatic. And now they live together 15 years later. Eve is an art history lecturer at the University of Leicester. Alice is a wild bartender. The way that the intro describes them, you think they're like, two very different opposites attract sort of people. They're going to have this conversation about whether or not to have kids. And then the dialogue is a little bit not what maybe you're expecting to see, given what you saw in the intro. Were you a bit surprised by the dialogue, or did you think it was pretty consistent with what you read in the intro?
It was definitely surprising. Yeah, so at first you get this picture that there's this couple and they love each other, and then you start reading more about what's happening, and you start slowly but surely you start to feel really upset for Eve, and you start to wonder what's wrong with Alice and wonder why is she doing this, and is Eve okay? Maybe she needs help.
Interesting. So, did you immediately side with Eve rather than Alice when they were talking about whether they should have kids?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. As long as I'm getting the names right, Eve is the one that didn't want children.
Yeah, the art history lecture, and Alice is the bartender who did.
Yeah, it was hard to sympathize with Alice, for almost all of what she was saying.
Really? So why did you find as a woman hard to sympathize with Alice? Because I would think Alice, at least in the first part, is saying what most women say to each other about why you should have kids.
I don't know if I've had that conversation as a conscious like conversation, but it does feel as like an implied that obviously having a child is awesome and beautiful, and I feel that way. But man, so I've dated people who never wanted any kids, and the way that they talk about not wanting kids feels really messed up. Like they'll say, you know, giving birth is just disgusting. And to me that feels so unnatural, and I'm like, that's such a weird way. That's a weird stance, bro. That's a weird stance, my guy. But I mean, it's still okay to not want kids. And I think the more important thing is what Eve was talking about was if you don't want kids, it's really messed up to have them.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
you,
So that was the
you
thing
want
that
to
made
bring
you
kids into the
sympathetic.
world that have parents that don't even like kids or want children.
Yeah. So that was sort of the crux of the argument. So initially, Alice was sort of saying, no, 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 you should have kids because once you have them, your body will make you like them, whether you want it to or not. And if you don't have them, even if you're happy, your body will punish you and make you unhappy. So you might as well just force yourself to have them because there's no other way you'll be happy. Do you think she's wrong about that?
Yeah, I think she's wrong. That's a really twisted way to think. Um, no one should ever force another person to do anything biological. And a lot of people have a lot of severe trauma, and they know that if they have a child, they'll pass that trauma on, and they don't want to do it. And that's probably good. And to argue that there are no parents in the world that are shitty parents, that's just really a crazy argument. Because the amount of children that are abused and starving, uh, it's really asinine. And you know, specifically for that reason, people should be able to say no when they know they don't want to have children. Or if you don't want to give birth, you can adopt a child. And I think her demanding that they have their own children was extremely selfish and self centered. And I thought she would be a terrible parent.
Interesting. So in the first part of the dialogue, she kind of gives the normal arguments that people often give about why women should have children, and if they don't, their bodies will punish them. But then as it goes on, she starts giving kind of like woke arguments. She starts saying like you should have a baby to stick it to the patriarchy. You're letting down the queer community if you won't give birth. You're a misogynist if you won't give birth. You're making things harder for gay people who want to adopt. Like, what did you think of these arguments that she started giving Eve?
Well, she's doing straw man arguments, but at the same time, she does have some points, and that is, if queer people are raising children, it will normalize it. But that, just because you're queer doesn't mean that you should have kids and that you'll be a good parent. So that was, you know, that's a ridiculous gaslighting technique.
Okay.
Obviously, the opposite, this kids need structure.
Okay. And the other thing about the argument is that no matter what Eve said, Alice wouldn't accept it. She always had a comeback. To the point where like Eve was starting to feel like she was literally going crazy. What did you
Yeah,
think of what Alice was doing to her?
I've been through things like that. I've seen that happen to people, and I don't know. What can I say? It's terrible. It's horrible, and she was trying to break her down and break down her willpower. And there are some people that have extremely strong willpower, and they do learn that they know how to break people down, and just fight with them until they can win. Um, I thought it was so abusive. I'm not sure how much you can cause like a fractured psyche within someone else, but I can't imagine it being healthy.
So you think a lot of what Alice was doing by breaking down Eve's will, that's not only quite common, but you've experienced that yourself?
I don't know how common it is, but I know at least within like unhealthy relationships where power dynamics are a thing. I know that it's common within those. I don't know the numbers, but it does occur.
Have you experienced being on the other end of this yourself? You don't have to go into details, but I'm
I've
curious.
been both the perpetrator and the victim in these kinds of things. Mostly the victim, but yeah, I've I've engaged in power plays with people. I've never the way that Alice did it seemed really intuitive, and I've never seen that. I've never seen someone say, "I know that if she breaks down completely, she'll do what I want." That seems extreme to me. But I've seen people do it unconsciously. So I don't mind to go into detail. I had a parent who was really severely alcoholic, and I'm not going to diagnose them, but they had really long periods where they would do this psychological game thing, and it would last hours and hours, and um, the goal really was to make whichever victim at the time submit to them and just kind of agree with them, and it was after a while I just realized that it gave this person pleasure. So um, I don't know. People do weird things when their mind is broken, but I don't know how much. It's hard because the way the book talks about Alice and Eve, neither one of them experience Eve. Eve ends up being fine. Um, I might get filleted for this, but there are some socionics types that engage in this kind of behavior pretty frequently in the Beta Quadra. Uh, they really enjoy it, and they almost need it. Like, I know that sounds crazy to say that it's natural, but yeah.
So do you have any I maybe some ideas about what socionics types you think Eve and Alice are?
Yeah, I wouldn't um I wouldn't correlate this too strongly to MBTI, but I'll use MBTI terms. I would say Eve is probably an INFJ.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Alice may be an ISTJ, the one with extroverted sensing, as in the power dynamic function as the creative function. So in socionics, that would be LSI and IEI, and they would be activity partners. So relations of increasing energy, and but I don't know because she also she parties a lot, and LSIs are much less likely to do that. So maybe she was an SLE type.
Just let everybody know, the next bit of this conversation contains spoilers. So by the end of that argument, everything keeps getting more and more heated and more angry. And then finally, Eve gets violent and she attacks Alice and she throws a chair at her and nearly kills her. And then Alice falls to the floor, and then Eve starts kicking her in the stomach and saying, "Fuck your babies, fuck women, fuck the queer community." Um, so at this point in the story, were you siding with Alice or Eve?
I was still siding with Eve.
Even after the violence?
Yeah, she got broken down so much, and the whole time you're just like, God, somebody protect this woman. She's being abused. And then she turns around and protects herself, and you're like, yes, finally. But I mean, I didn't I didn't want to see her lose complete control and just continue hurting the her person like forever and ever. But and then uh Alice has the same like response that I have right when I have it, and I'm like, what the fuck? So yeah, that was a little wild to experience that.
Mm. So there was a part of you that even though like maybe you didn't morally approve of Eve's violence, you were sort of still sympathetic to it because she was standing up for
Yeah.
herself finally.
Yeah. I don't believe in violence, but yeah, I mean like there's a natural part of humans where we want to protect each other and we want to protect ourselves. And I guess because of what I've gone through, I've watched a codependent relationship where the supposedly good guy is always encouraging the bad guy to do horrible things and never stands up for themselves and allows other people to uh, scapegoats other people, you know, to avoid being the target. And so I hate seeing people allow themselves to be abused. I hate seeing that.
So in a way, it
So
was kind of a relief to see Eve finally get violent.
yeah. Well, it would be nice if she would have gotten less violent, but it's still better than her like getting brainwashed and like interrogated for that long.
Mm,
I think that's pretty severe abuse to do that to someone at 5 a.m.
yeah, definitely. And then we find out there's a major plot twist. So all that behavior from Alice wasn't real. Alice was actually testing Eve to see if Eve would stand up to her because Alice was worrying that Eve was a pushover and really wanted to have kids and wasn't really being honest about it. So she was doing all of that to test Eve to see if Eve would stand up for herself. What did you think of that test?
It's really mind-boggling. I had to take a step back and really think about that and wonder, do people do this in real life? And I think they probably do. Um, Hopefully not very frequently, but I don't know. Have you seen that? Have you seen people do these kinds of things?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. It's wild. Um, I thought it was crazy and abusive. It was a relief to see that she took it as a challenge to be better. And that was relieving. And it made it a little bit harder to be mad at Alice, but I still didn't understand why Alice would do such a cruel thing to somebody she loved.
Interesting. So another thing we find out at that point is part of the decision process that made Alice think this was a good idea was her therapy with Dr. Adams. And Dr. Adams is the same woman who diagnosed Janet as a psychopath. So
Yeah, and then we start wondering what's wrong with Dr. Adams.
do you think there's something maybe wrong with Dr. Adams?
He might be a little bit sadistic. I don't know. I thought the book was going to take it somewhere to explain this person as like someone who's toying with people and having games with them.
Well, she's also Davis's therapist later on in the book too.
Oh no. How did I
So,
miss that?
yeah, she teaches Davis how to play the harp and tries to seduce her. It doesn't work.
That's right. Okay. She tried to seduce Davis and Davis wouldn't allow it to happen.
No, but she taught Davis things like how to do transcendental meditation, how to play the harp, and this kind of stuff. So Dr. Adams is actually she's in the lives of all the characters of the book. Do you think she's probably a bad therapist?
Yes. Yeah, you don't really need to explain that one. She's really predatory.
Do you think there are predatory therapists in real life like that?
I've never encountered one, but probably. I'm sure that there are, yeah. Yeah. People like there are a lot of people that have positions of power that, you know, we realize for 50 years they've been abusing people.
Hmm. And Dr. Adams could very well be one of these people.
It's definitely abuse to try and seduce your patient.
Hmm. And she might have encouraged Alice to do this test to see if Eve was a pushover.
Yeah, and yeah, yeah, and she encouraged I forget her name again. The mother
Davis?
Davis. Yeah, she might have encouraged Davis to write her son a letter online so that he would find it later.
Yeah, you never know. She might have done that, but we'll get to
And
that
see
in a
what
minute.
would happen.
So getting back to Alice and Eve, so that they break up for a year after that horrible test. And in that year, Eve kind of has a transformation of character. So she's like no longer bullied at school by the students or the staff or the head of the department. Her students are now respecting her. The faculty respects her. But this is because she's now bossing people around. She's threatening her students. She's putting words in their mouths. She's sexually teasing her boss, leading her on and insulting her. But all of this works, and now like she's no longer a pushover at work. What did you think of this transformation in Eve?
Again, it's hard not to root for Eve because of what she went through. Um, I always root for the underdog, but and I try to think about things in terms of socionics. So we have these types that really enjoy power dynamics, and they may be pushovers, but they may enjoy having a powerful person by their side, and they may enjoy being pushed around because it invigorates them, and they may enjoy pushing other people around. Um, I want to leave room. I want to leave space for that and say that part of that is human nature, and violence and aggression is also human nature. Um, as much as we don't like it, and that's not the ideal, it is very common and very natural to push people around. It's a political thing. So it's confusing to watch her transform that way, but it's also empowering. And I just I never wanted to see Eve like allow herself to be abused again. So the fact that she turned her life around felt great.
Okay, so
And
do you think there's maybe a sad fact of life? Sometimes when you're bullied at work, the only way you can make it stop is to become an asshole.
maybe, but I've never seen that work for me. But I think people are either naturally pushy or they're naturally not. And if they're not the pushy type, they typically only get really angry and lose control when they've been pushed beyond their limits. And they don't typically harness that power to the extent that Eve did. So it was interesting to see her do that, but I don't know how realistic it is, unless it was like a psychopathy thing. I don't know if she was crazy or if she was in control, or was there some kind of abuse that she healed and now she was really being herself, or what happened, you know?
Okay, so after this year, Eve and Alice get back together for a second relationship. But in this new second relationship, there's violence. And although
Yeah, a lot of it.
Eve initiates all the violence, or most of it, ultimately Alice knows kickboxing, so Eve constantly gets her ass kicked, and Alice beats the shit out of her so much that she often has to go to hospital. But this is kind of accepted and normalized in their new second relationship. So why do you think Alice and Eve went down this road in their second relationship?
I don't know, maybe Alice encouraged it. Maybe that's what Alice wanted and she is kind of controlling Eve.
Interesting. So do you think like there's something about the test that broke them up originally that when they got back together now made everything violent?
Eve's so passive and sweet, and then she turns into this monster. But it seems like she likes it and she likes herself, and it seems like Alice likes it too. So if the only people that they're hurting is each other and it's consensual, I don't know if it's bad. I certainly wouldn't like to see a child in that environment, but um, I don't know. It's hard to condemn people for doing what they want, even if it's damaging. At the same time, poor Eve still, because she's always in the hospital now.
Yeah.
hmm you throughout the whole thing, you feel like Eve has this potential to really live a happy life,
Do you think
and
Alice is bad for Eve?
I think they're bad for each other.
Okay. So towards the end of this story, Alice does something that really upsets Eve. She sleeps with two of her favorite students. Eve violently attacks Alice, and Alice defends herself by poking both of her fingers into Eve's eyes, nearly blinding her. And that's when Joe, from our first part of the story, he comes to look after Eve because he's the neighbor, because Alice doesn't want to take time off of work and she's already been, nearly fired before for being late. So Joe, rather than Eve, has to look after, Joe, rather than Alice, has to look after Eve in hospital while Eve is getting examined and might possibly be blind because of Alice. So, what did you think of how Joe came back into the story at this point?
That was interesting, and it felt nice because Joe and Eve both seem like really kind people who could really use a little break and a little just a time to relax and just think about like things that make them happy and not be plagued by the violence of the world around them. Even though Eve was perpetrating, I don't think that makes her happy. Um,
Hmm.
Alice, it seems to make her happy, but um, I don't
So,
know.
go
It
on.
was nice to see them commiserate and become friends. I thought that was nice.
Okay, so that night they had a long chat with each other, and even though Eve was in pain and couldn't see and was on painkillers, she started to have like romantic feelings for Joe. And then, and Alice, of course, was thinking, oh, this is great. Eve has a friend. Maybe Joe can help Eve calm her violence down. But actually, Eve never wanted to see Joe again because she
Hmm.
had these feelings for him. Why do you think she felt that way?
I don't know. There's a lot of reasons why people would feel romantically towards another person. I think a lot of times it's just natural to either be compatible or not. But her choosing to never see Joe again, I'm not sure why she would have done that. I was wondering if Alice set her up for that too, but it never became clear to me. But um, I don't know. I understood where Eve was coming from. She made a decision that she wasn't going to fall in love with this person, and she separated herself from him.
Yeah. So shortly after that separation happens, then Alice does something that really shocks Eve. She reveals to Eve that she's not only been sleeping with her brother, but she's also been sleeping with Eve's 18-year-old nephew. And she tricked the nephew into thinking that she had protection when she didn't. And she willfully got pregnant because it was fun. And not only that, but she's going to name the child after Eve's mother. She's going to name her Kara. And when Eve confronts her and says, please don't do this, this is so horrible, Alice punches Eve and breaks her nose and throws her across the floor with the punch because it's so hard. And while Eve is on the floor covered in blood, she apologizes to Alice, not because she wants to be a parent, but because she's frightened of what Alice is going to be like as a single mother. And so now they're actually a family. So do you think this was a good decision on Eve's part?
God, I didn't want to see her do that, but who's to say? God, I don't know. Yeah, I hated seeing Eve support Alice in any way. Um, Alice should never be a parent, and Eve supporting Alice. really kind of just perpetuates the cycle, I think.
What do you think is wrong with Alice?
I don't know. She's she's a bitch. Um, she likes violence. She's promiscuous. She's impulsive. She's selfish. She doesn't have any respect for what kind of life she's going to bring a child into. It's horrible.
Okay. And the last thing it says about Alice in that story is Alice doesn't believe that abuse is real. She thinks you should
Oh
be able to
yeah.
behave however you want, because abuse is just like telling people to be monogamous. It's just a social construction. So she thinks she can be as abusive as she wants to be. What do you think about this?
I mean, there are a lot of perspectives you can use to look at any moral question, and like they can all be relatively true from a bird's eye view, because sure, we're all going to die, who cares? But um, I don't know. I you know, from that perspective, that nothing really matters. One day humans won't even exist on this planet. From that perspective, it doesn't matter if she's abusive. Um, but maybe she shouldn't be thinking from that perspective. Maybe she should be thinking about whether or not the people around her are enjoying her, or if she's protecting people or not.
Okay. So by the end of that story, of the Alice and Eve story, did you see Alice as like the villain?
Yes. Yeah. I felt like Alice was a villain the entire time.
Okay. And what kind of family do you think they're going to have now that they're raising a kid finally?
Like a codependent, narcissistic relationship with a really psychologically damaged child.
So do you think there's no way that the process of raising this child will make them a healthier couple, or do you think they'll just really mess up the kid?
I think people mature in stages depending on brain development and really hard lessons. And I don't think that raising a child is one of those hard lessons that really change people dramatically enough. And I think that using a child to say, "Oh, I'm going to grow up now," it's really abusive, because it puts the child in a parental role when ideally you're the protector. The children should never have to be a prop for your development.
Interesting. So you think it's pretty certain that Alice is going to be a bad mother?
There may be times when she could behave the right way to a child. Um, maybe she grows up and changes, but I don't think it's for the child. But maybe.
Okay. So like by the end of that story, by the end of the Alice and Eve story, like how did that story make you feel?
It's so horrible. Uh, a little disgusted and perturbed, because I know that people like this exist, and there's probably a lot of them. And the damage that people do to each other is irrevocable. You can't change it. You can't go back in time and fix you know the poor brain development that you caused. Um, Helpless. Yeah, I felt helpless, and it really makes you think and wonder, really, what can we do for each other? How can you make this better? How can we as individuals do something, or can we? Is it a lost cause?
Do you think Eve would have a happier, more fulfilling life if she just stayed away from Alice?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would like to see her get custody of their child and never talk to Alice again.
Really? So you think Alice is like toxic then?
Yeah, Alice is really bad, I think.
Now that's interesting. So did you see Alice is worse than Lorraine?
Hmm. I'm not sure. I just no, probably not.
Interesting. So you've got these characters who do really horrible things, like stabbing people's eyes, having sex with their partner's nephew, intriguing them, all this really terrible stuff, violence. And yet Lorraine seems worse than all of them.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that is. Well, she killed the puppy though.
That's true. We find that out later. She did
Yeah.
kill his dog. And that was after she also threw his laptop out the window after saying horrible things to his dad on Skype. So
Yeah,
she
and she burnt Joe with cigarettes.
and she burned him a cigarette and she threw a broken glass at him and ripped up all his clothes.
And then she convinced him it was okay. And that might be the worst sin, I think.
Okay, fair enough. So then we go from the procreation story to Los Angeles. And we go to Davis and Lena. And so we then go into Joe's favorite erotic fantasy and what her life is actually like in Los Angeles. And so you see her as a teenager, and she's friends with her friend Lena, who winds up being a successful author. And they were very good friends throughout their lives, trolling through the streets of Pasadena when they were young, and and intelligent young women who wanted a man to take them away from the boring suburban life that they had and take them into a life where they could have like conversations about Brene Magritte and art and music and philosophy and all these kind of things. And they hated being teenagers. And then their friendship ended because there was a boy named Ben that Lena was really attracted to, and she thought they were going to be, a relationship item soon. And then she found out that Davis, who was a year older than her and not a minor, she got Ben drunk and had sex with him and got pregnant and wasn't gonna terminate the baby. And now Ben has to marry Davis because he has responsibilities as a father. And Lena was absolutely heartbroken, disgusted, betrayed by her friend, but she kept it all in. She never really talked about it to Davis. She just started ignoring her and sort of being very condescending and a bit nasty. What did you think of this?
It's a long setup to a story. Um, and a lot happens. I felt a lot of it was relatable because when it talks about teenagers and then the way people change over time and the way people choose different career paths and they go into different lifestyles, uh, that felt nostalgic to me. Um, it's very realistic. I thought that the friends would have this core difficulty that would cause them to have a really deep resentment. And it reminds me that sometimes people should not be in each other's lives, but they choose to stay in each other's lives just out of like kind of a sixth sense of like, a sixth satisfaction for watching them suffer or something.
Yeah, and there were times when Davis was telling Lena, "I feel unconfident as a new mother, and I don't know what to do." Lena was sort of relishing it and saying in her head, "Davis is a pathetic piece of shit," and she was really enjoying watching her friends suffer over the phone. What did you think of that?
Um, I had a person that I grew up knowing who would give drugs to her kids, and I sometimes would think about them and think, I just hate that trailer trash bitch, and just because of the things that she did was just so horrible. Over the long term, it seems less bad in the moment, but over the long term, the daughter who she gave drugs to died.
Oh
So
my God.
of an overdose. So really, in the long run, she caused the death of her daughter. Um, so I can relate to feeling like um, Lena had a vicious feeling towards Davis that Davis was making horrible decisions and it was impacting other people, and Davis didn't seem to care or think about the future of those decisions. And Lena really hated her for that, and I can relate to that.
Interesting. So you kind of you didn't see Lena as sort of horrible and bitchy and catty. You sort of saw her as, well, if I were in her position, I'd be angry too.
Yeah, she didn't need to go out of her way to interact with the people that she hated, though. But um, I understand where she's coming from, but she really should have left those people alone.
Okay. Well, as it happens, in 2012, she met up with Davis and Max and Ben, and Max was 10, and she really loved the family, and she kind of started forgiving Davis, and if anything, felt sorry for Davis because she was like a struggling writer and poet. And Lena thought, well, she's not as good of a writer as me because I've got like a PhD and I've got books coming out and I work at a university. But, she was like, I don't have to hate her anymore. I love her husband and I love her kid. And then 4 years later, they meet again in Pasadena at a coffee shop called Jones Coffee Roasters next to the Barnes and Noble. And they start talking, and then Davis slowly reveals to Lena something that absolutely shocks her, which is Davis has become the most famous porn star in the world. What did you think of this?
I'm sure this has happened. It seemed a little unrealistic, maybe, but a little bit shocking as well that that's what had happened because the last time we checked in with Davis, she was living uh, a wholesome life, really. And writing online and having a few supporters is that's very wholesome and very positive for Davis. And she was a mother. She had a husband, and she had all the support that she really needed. Maybe not all, but yeah. So the change was huge, and it was kind of a little bit disappointing. But at the same time, you kind of want to support her if that's what she wants to do. That's how I felt at the time. Well, okay, this is the lifestyle she wants.
Okay. So while she was explaining to Lena like her new career in porn, she kept doing these things that made Lena really, really angry. Like she kept saying she was more attractive than other women. She kind of put Lena down and said she was plain looking. She started body shaming all these people. She started saying she had no guilt about sleeping with men who were in relationships and lying to women about them. She said she hated monogamy for everybody, not just her, and thought no one should be monogamous. And then she was saying that she was actually filming her porn in her own home, and her son was having to prepare food snacks for people that were going to come over to their house and have sex with her. And then he'd have to go play video games in the garage. And then Lena just kept getting more and more angry. Were you sympathetic to Lena in her anger hearing all of this?
I mean, I felt that it was a really reasonable stance to take, but at the same time, I was still waiting. I was still waiting for Davis to like unroll her story, and I was waiting for it to come together a little bit more because. So what it did was it really created this confusion in me about like what do I really believe is okay, and part of me wanted to say like if there was a balance here, that wouldn't really be the worst thing ever. But the way that Davis is doing it, she's really kind of being a horrible person to people that care about her. Um, but you really have to think about everything that's going on and try to sort through the like what is the problem here? What's really happening? Um,
Interesting. So you didn't have a problem that she was a like a porn star and a mother with a teenage son. It was how she was doing it.
yeah, when that whole thing was unfolding, I did. It's not that I didn't have a problem with it. It was more like I was struggling with that value in myself, trying to like understand why do I actually think that this is wrong, or like, is there a circumstance where this is a personal preference or a cultural preference? Because we know that there are countries all over the world where when a teenager starts to develop um, the cultural norms for what happens during those times are so drastically different. Like, for instance, there are families that share one room in some countries still.
Mhm.
So you really have to try and gain perspective for, what is culturally appropriate.
Interesting. So was a part of you thinking maybe this is okay?
At first, when it sounded like she was keeping her family away from it, so it really depended on how they felt about it, and it didn't really. I wasn't getting a feel for that at first. I was really wondering, like, how do they feel, you know?
Okay.
So it really depends. Is the effect how bad is the effect on the people around her? Like, if they were okay with it, I would be more all right with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that made Lena even more angry is Davis started complaining about her son. She started saying that her son was sort of giving her the silent treatment, and he seemed upset that his friends could see her having sex. And Davis said what she was doing with her son as a parent was to try and teach him that men should have no right to have any feelings whatsoever about any woman's sexual choices, even their own mother. And Lena really, really took offense at this argument. Did you agree with Davis when she was saying why she was doing what she was doing to teach Max to respect women?
Was she saying that that was the entire reason she was doing all that stuff?
Well, she was saying that's why it's okay. It's because I'm teaching Max to respect women and that Max should have no say over how women express their sexuality.
Yeah, I felt like she was being really unfair because she was saying that her feelings matter and whatever she wants, she should get, but no one else's feelings matter. And you don't have to ask people what they think. And if they disagree with you, then that's even more proof that their feelings are irrelevant.
Wow. So when Davis was saying all of this, how did you start to feel about Davis as a character?
I was really confused about what she was doing. I didn't hate her yet. I was more confused about what were her intentions, and I felt that she was unkind and selfish, but I don't know. I feel like so many people are, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not the worst offense, but depending on the scale of selfishness, it gets worse and worse.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point. So, in the next bit of the dialogue, Davis actually starts to exhibit some vulnerability, and she's saying her life isn't going so well, and she doesn't have any friends, and her relationship with her husband Ben is over. She doesn't feel any attraction to him anymore. He's boring. And you start to get a sense that like she still looks up to Lena. She still has fondness for her, wants Lena in her life as like a kind of mentor figure. And then Lena sort of reveals her philosophy of porn to Davis. So Lena starts to say, well, if you want to be a porn star, it's fine as long as you don't have children. Because if you do have children, while your porn career is like at its zenith, your kids are probably going to want to fuck you, and that's going to seriously fuck them up. Do you think Lena was right about that?
I don't really know if that would cause your children to want to have sex with you, but she's right that it would cause complications and that, like, in an ideal world, parents really would put their children first.
Mm-hmm.
So Lena's not wrong about that, but I don't know. It was still pretty confusing to me what was going on. I mean, I want to say that like she probably shouldn't do any of the things that she was doing, especially not like in their home. Um, I don't know. Yeah, I don't. I've never considered like it's because I have a 15-year-old child, a boy, and I can't imagine if he would come across me on the internet or something like that. And I don't know how he would feel, but I would like to say that he wouldn't, respond the way that Davis's son responded, but it seems like she, kind of groomed him to behave that way.
Okay, so as we get to the end of the dialogue, it sort of seems like actually, whether or not that's true about all porn stars, it seems at least in the case of Davis and her son Max, Max actually does want to sleep with his mother. And Davis probably wants to sleep with Max too, but she's holding back. And then Lena does something very weird, which is in a sort of jokey, sarcastic way, like she's being playful. She actually encourages Davis to have sex with Max. Why do you think she does this?
But I don't know. Either she was hoping to set her up, or it seemed like she was getting some kind of pleasure out of it. I'm not sure. I've never seen anyone act that way, and I can't imagine what the motivation to do that would be, other than like
Hmm.
just to see maybe what Davis would say,
What?
to maybe see what Davis would say, like lead her on in the conversation to see what her motives are.
Okay. So did you think maybe it was an accident, or like she didn't think that Davis would actually go through with it? She was just being kind of mischievous, or do you think she was intending to get Davis to have sex with Max?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It seemed contrary to Lena's character, but then, as things go on, it seems like Lena is really manipulative.
So when Lena did this, and then you started to see how she behaved after the incest happened and after Davis got beat up and left her family, and then Lena swooped in and became the new stepmother. What did you think of Lena as a character?
You know the lady on Harry Potter who becomes the head of the magic of ministry.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's how I started to see Lena. Um, just this crazy woman who had a lot of weird ideas and always had to get her way, and was vindictive and actually didn't care that much about anyone.
Hmm. And before that, were you already seeing her that way, or was that kind of like a shift in your perception?
Yeah, there's like a gray area there where I'm really confused about who Lena is. Because at first she seems really super rational. She
Hmm.
seems like a studious person who is focused on her career. She has like some anger towards people in her past, but that it seems reasonable. But most people don't behave the way that she behaved from that.
Okay. And when you kind of find out like what she was like on the inside, you start to really see who she was. Do you think she was like less likable than Davis, less sympathetic, or still more sympathetic?
God, I don't know. Um, I mean, they're both pretty horrible. Davis is probably the worst person in the book.
That's interesting. What makes you like put her over Lorraine in awfulness?
They seem they seem to have like an equal amount of just I don't fucking care about anyone. Everything that I want is okay, and you all have to do what I need. And but the thing that makes Davis so horrible is failing to protect her child from herself
Hmm.
and grooming him. It's not like the immediate consequence that's bad. It's the fact that it fucked him up for life because she may or may not have been aware that that age is when your brain develops around these things, it becomes a part of who you are for the rest of your life. And
Hmm.
that's the thing that's so sad and upsetting.
Well, as we go on to the story, we find out that go on through the story, we find out that actually filming porn in her home wasn't the first thing she did. That actually, when he was a toddler, she was molesting him. She had planned to have sex with him even back then. And when he became an adolescent, even before she started doing porn, she was constantly flirting with her son and giving him an erection on purpose. So it's almost like sleeping with him was the final stage of what she had always wanted to do with him. How did that make you see her character?
Um, I don't know, more deranged than I had originally thought. Um, I don't know if there's like a saving grace for her or not. Um, and I think a lot of she's really impulsive, and I'm not sure how much of what she's doing is intended to hurt people or gain power over them, um, or how much of it is just she's not thinking about her the way that her actions affect other people. I'm not really sure how bad she is, but I mean it's pretty bad. It's hard to get worse than what she did as a mother, at least.
So do you think she's like a horrible mother?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And how do you think her actually sleeping with him and he ejaculated her in her 4 times, and then his father came in and then beat the shit out of her, and then suddenly Max was saving his mother from the father beating the shit out of her. How do you think that impacted Max?
Well, throughout the book, we hear that Max is so much smarter than his age. I don't know how it would have impacted him. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it probably became a part of him. Like that traumatic day probably became such a huge part of who he is that I don't know. Like if you could guess how much of his brain was impacted by that day, it would probably be like almost all of it. He probably would have like almost no respite in his day-to-day living from that.
Hmm. So when we see him grow up and we go into the future, now we're in 2027, 28, we can see that he's become a young man who is paradoxically very much like the man that Lena and Davis wanted to get with when they were teenagers in Pasadena. Like he's almost exactly like the boyfriend they wanted but never had.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is grooming or not.
That's an interesting point. But the one thing about him that isn't like that is he's got a bunch of female friends who are very attractive who look like his mother. They all want to be his girlfriend. He's like, no, 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 not interested. But the reason he's not interested is because he doesn't want to have a sexuality, because the only person he can get an erection for is his mother, and he'd rather be asexual than have sexual thoughts about his mother. What is your
Yeah, and that's really common with grooming. It's because the brain is so, sensitive at the age that he was when he was being groomed, that when you develop your sexuality, he probably just had no way to get away from it. And that is really common with grooming, that um, the children that are groomed have a really hard time separating their sexuality from their early experiences. And so it either becomes their own perversion, or, what happens to Max is that he can't even enjoy a different female.
and what do you think about the fact that his female friends are constantly bullying him and he just thinks, well, that's what women are like, and he puts up with it?
Yeah, his mom treated him that way, and he kind of, I don't know how much of that is because she taught him to be that way, to like that, you know, such extreme feminism was right, but it seemed like he would have been smarter than that, but I don't know how much of his self-esteem was destroyed that he just didn't want to fight.
Hmm. So now we get to 2028. He's a grad student. He's studying the same filmmaker that his mother loves, David Cronenberg. And then he suddenly has this accidental encounter with his mother's writing. He goes to a website where he wants to read one of his mother's old essays, and instead he finds a new essay called Why I'd Never Want to Be a Nice Person, where she's basically saying that she liked having sex with him and she'd do it again if she could, and she doesn't care about how much it would hurt him. And then he starts compulsively masturbating again. His sexuality comes alive, and he becomes obsessed with it and obsessed with the idea that he could have sex with his mother finally. And he almost gets to a point where he decides to email her and seduce her because he knows that if he does, she's still attractive and he still wants her and it can definitely happen. But rather than do this, he's so ashamed of wanting to be with his mother that he decides instead to become a woman. What did you think of this?
It sets up a lot of hard scenarios to think about. Part of me, if it weren't for the grooming, I don't think incest is that morally unforgivable as like grooming a child is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he's an adult at this point, but his mind is so twisted that it's not even his choice, really. He's still just playing out the control she had over him. So, like, to gain control over himself, he had to completely change his gender because she completely controlled that side of him. Um, I don't know. It's really hard because even though she groomed him, that's still his mother, and he still has a connection with her, and he still loves her. Um,
Do you think things might have been better for him if instead of becoming a woman, he actually did have sex with his mother at age 28?
I don't. I don't know. I'm not really sure because she's such a terrible person, and I think the outcome that he chose was I can't I don't like saying what's right for other people, but I also hate that he had to mutilate himself that way. But it seemed to I
Well,
shouldn't
that's
call it mutilation, but
yeah, that's the other interesting thing that happens is he initially doesn't want to have the whole surgery. He just wants to have female hormones and dress like a woman. But his friends bully him into chopping off his own dick. Uh, what did you think of that?
it's really just a snowball of like horrible experiences for him, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I felt relieved at the outcome because I don't know. I just really, really, really hoped that it gave him relief from all of that psychological damage that he was experiencing.
Yeah. So at the end of the story, when he becomes a 30-something adult, he decides he doesn't want anything to do with his stepmother, anything to do with his father, anything to do with his biological mother. He's now called Delilah. She goes to England. She teaches film, and she goes to Leicester, which is the city of the only two contemporary writers she likes reading, Janet and Joe. Um,
Hmm.
so we're now linking back to the beginning of the book. But the last thing that Delilah does is she darkens her skin because throughout the dialogue with Lena and Davis, Davis keeps saying she's so proud that her son doesn't have dark skin like her husband. What did you think of that?
Just boils down to personal choice at that point. It's sad that he felt like he had to do that. She's so objectifying, and she turns him into like this person who hates himself, and he's trying so hard to get away from everything that she liked. And I'm just, I don't know. It's personal choice, and I'm glad he found like a way to. I don't know. It's sad though. It's sad when people hate themselves and try to change.
So that's the end of the sex story. So when you got to the end of that story, how did you feel?
I was proud of Joe. Or Joe? No, I was proud of
Matt?
Max for um, doing whatever was necessary to take control back of his own psychology.
And were you happy that he decided to cut off all his parents?
Yes. Yeah, I was happy about that. And he cut off his friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was nice to see him figure out a way to rationalize and move past the toxic situations he was in. Because a lot of people don't. They kind of just accept it.
Mm-hmm. Now, some people watching this might get upset at us because we're calling him him, but
Oh,
there's a reason for that, and that is he never actually self-identifies as a woman. It's
uh,
purely a way that he gets other people to see him because he thinks that being a woman is something that makes people nicer to you, and it also allows it's easier for you to be horrible to other people. And that's why he enjoys being seen as a woman, even though he doesn't identify as one deep down. What did you think of
mhm.
that?
I can't really confirm that or deny it because I have never been a male. So I don't really know if it would be easier or harder. Men try to tell me to watch out for people who won't respect women, and I don't know that I've had that experience either. So um, that's I don't know. That was his experience, and I don't know if I can confirm. I feel like so uneven power dynamics exist, and male and female experiences sometimes can not be as separate as we think they are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so men and women both experience abuse, and it's damaging to both of them, and they both perpetuate abuse. And sexism exists on both sides. So maybe that was Max's experience, and if it was, I'm glad that he got some relief.
Okay. So Max goes to Leicester to hang out with Joe and Janet, and then we go back to 2015, back to Joe and Lorraine. And Joe and Lorraine are having like a horrendous argument where Lorraine is being like outrageously abusive. And then at the end of it, they make up where he has to apologize to her.
I know.
And then he goes online and he sees that he's got an email from his old psychopath girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, Janet.
Hmm.
This email, like does this really long spiel where she talks about like how no one should love anyone unconditionally if they're adults, and that you should stand up for yourself and act self-interestedly. And she says some quite cold, cruel things as well. But she also is encouraging Joe to leave Lorraine and sort of suggesting that she wants to be with him and she still is attracted to him. And by the end of it, it's like she's kind of expressing that she really, really loves him. What did you think of this email from Janet?
It was it was a little bit messed up, but Janet's way of thinking is such a relief from the craziness of all the other characters in this book because the way she's rationalizing things, it gives you a moment to just get sane. Uh, the other stuff where she's a little bit manipulating Joe, and I didn't understand what her motivations were. Maybe she's trying to save Joe from Lorraine. Um, I
Okay. Did
I
you
have a
think
hard
it
time
was
being mad at Janet for anything that she does other than like the physical violence.
okay? Did you think though that it was an honest email where she was genuinely expressing love, or did you think it was manipulation?
I felt like I felt like Janet was a person who said exactly what she thought. And I know the book proves that wrong sometimes, but it still feels like she's being genuine almost always. And she's just simply saying, "This is what I believe in," and I don't I didn't feel like she was trying to say I love you. I felt like she was trying to say love yourself.
Interesting. So by the end of this email, did you like Janet? Did you find her sympathetic?
Yeah, I always liked Janet.
So is she your favorite female in the book in terms of likability?
Yeah, probably. Um, who else could? Yeah, most of the people in the book are really unlikable.
And the psychopath is the most likable.
I also think Eve is pretty cool, even though she became violent at some times.
Okay.
Well, I didn't think that that was who she was. I felt like she was just kind of going crazy.
Okay. So after Joe shares this email from Janet with Lorraine, they have a big fight. It's really, nasty at the beginning. Then they actually start to work on their relationship. They just talk about whether or not they want to have children. Um, they get a bit violent, but it turns both of them on. Lorraine starts to get a bit flirty. She starts to show a more soft, vulnerable side of herself. They even play games with each other where they lie to each other on purpose to see what kind of reactions they can get from the other. And by the end, like Joe is starting to feel like he wants to stay with Lorraine and he loves her. And they're both saying things like, Janet's a psychopath and, or Janet's a psycho bitch. And then Lorraine says, she doesn't respect you because she tried to turn you on in the email. And then, the both of them look like they're going to work on the relationship and Janet's long gone from Joe's life. Did you think this was a good move that they, should have come together and, left Janet in the dustbin? Or were you sort of rooting for Janet to take Joe back?
I didn't really care if he gets with Janet. I just don't want him to be with Lorraine. Like I wish he would, gain a set of balls and realize that she's a horrible person and she doesn't really care about him. But at the same time, it was nice to see them treating each other like kindly and gently and enjoying each other and laughing. That felt really relieving because it could have been another situation where Janet or Lorraine felt threatened and like tried to beat up Joe or something like that.
Okay, so when you saw her kind of like kinder, softer, more vulnerable, flirty side, let's say, did that change your opinion of Lorraine at all? Did you think she was still pretty awful?
Um, I don't know. I don't think. Yeah, I just felt like she was temporarily enjoyable, but beyond that, still kind of horrible.
Okay.
She didn't really deserve Joe, and he should put up uh he shouldn't put up with her shit or trust that she's gonna be better. I don't think.
Okay. So then what happens at the end of the book is that Joe and Lorraine actually break up. Joe loses weight. Joe and Lorraine become friends instead of lovers. And it's Lorraine, ironically, who convinces Joe to go back with Janet, which he does, and then Joe and Janet get married. What did you think of that?
Yeah, that was crazy. I was proud of Lorraine and Joe for that. I always wanted to see Joe and Janet together, but when it describes the way that Janet was manipulating Joe and turning him into a person that he didn't want to be, uh, that makes you question whether or not it is a good relationship or not. But it's got to be better than Lorraine.
Well, the question is, do you think she's changed in the 20 years between the first and second relationship?
Yeah. Well, probably not. I mean, if you put her under that much psychological stress again, maybe she'd still flip out like that. But um, I don't think Joe will do that to her. But I don't know. Maybe she needs to be locked up so she doesn't hurt anyone.
Mm. Do you think there's a chance that Joe and Janet, because they're older, might have a healthy, nice relationship?
I do. I thought that Janet and Joe's relationship was like 90% good. Like, yeah. And you can't have nothing is really perfect. No person is perfect. But she was, I thought, mostly a good person. And yeah, most of their relationships seemed quite enjoyable.
And also, when they got married, they really changed a lot since they were when they were young. So, for instance, they now like marriage. They don't hate
Mm.
Valentine's Day anymore. They like capitalism. They dance to cheesy pop songs they don't like because they want to treat their wedding guests with kindness, respect, and dignity. Do you think they grew a lot since their first relationship?
Maybe Joe did. I think Janet has always had a firm grasp on what her values were.
Hmm.
Um, well, honestly, I didn't think that either one of those two were so damaged that they should have broken up in the first place.
Interesting. So you thought they could have been all right just being together for the whole 20 years without Lorraine ever being a part of Joe's life.
Yeah, all that was unnecessary. Joe should have never broken up with Janet.
Okay. And the last we hear about Lorraine is she's at the wedding with her new boyfriend, Sasha Glazer, the fitness instructor, and she's being so vicious and so loud and how she's arguing with her new boyfriend that Joe has to ask both of them to leave. What did you think of that?
A little comical. Um, I've definitely been that person at times. Um, and I've seen other people act that way. And it's a little bit funny because, it's realistic and I don't know. Part of you kind of doesn't want Lorraine to be happy because she's such an asshole.
So do you think she, by the end of the book, is starting to grow a bit and become a better person, and or do you think she's always going to be an asshole?
Lorraine, I don't know. I hope I hope so. I don't know. She'd really have to change profoundly, but I feel like some of our values are things that really don't ever change. I don't know. I hate to say that, but I don't think I don't think she'll ever really be a wholesome person.
And do you think she'll always hate fat people?
Yeah, she might be less disgusted, but overall, I don't think she'll ever really think that they're equal to her.
Okay. So in the final chapter of the book where we're not into the dreams yet, um, we find out about Joe's porn star mother, Jodie Green, who was the most famous UK porn star in the 80s and 90s. And throughout this time, when he was growing up, she abused him, humiliated him, criticized him relentlessly, and tried to have sex with him over and over again. And he said no. There was even a point where Jodie was sleeping with Janet. But in 2003-4, when Jody got cancer, Joe decided to become her caretaker after he'd gained weight and now had an eye patch. And she was being nice to him for the first time, really, because she didn't want to die alone. She wanted to die with someone holding her hand. And she couldn't have that with anybody else because she'd burnt bridges with everyone in her life. So Joe was the only person who would hold her hand while she was dying, and her biggest fear was dying alone. And at the moment of her death, her and her son were having this moment where he was like forgiving her, and she was starting to think about how much she actually loved Joe and what kind of mother she would have liked to have been. And he was thinking about how she was responsible for his love of books and art and jazz. And it seemed like on her deathbed they were really connecting. And then she suddenly said, "I so wish we had a baby together. I wish you came inside of me." And Joe got so angry, he dropped her hand, walked out of the hospital, and left her to die alone. Did you agree with Joe when he did this?
It's a matter of personal choice. Um, I know people that uh, I wouldn't be with on their deathbed. I can't blame Joe for that choice.
Did you think it was cruel or did you think it was justified?
Well, I don't know why he did it or what he even gained from being there in the first place. Um, I can't imagine really being able to enjoy that moment, knowing that the person that you're doing it with is so twisted and cares so little for you. I don't know. Um, it may have been a little bit cruel, I think, yeah, but still reasonable for him to make that choice, in my
Okay.
opinion.
Do you think if you were him, you would have made that same choice or would you have stayed with her?
Well, that's really hard because it's not really that far divorced from um, it's so realistic to me personally. I'm not sure. There's gonna come a time when I'll have to make that choice for myself.
I mean, there's someone in your life you think could genuinely say something horrible to you on their deathbed and then you might want to leave them alone to die alone?
More like the bond there is just not genuine, and it would be really empty, and I would have to pretend like that person was not vicious just to comfort them. And I really would rather not. I don't like opening closed wounds. I don't like forgiving people for horrible things that they do to each other. And I would probably still do it, but it would be awkward because I will not pretend like a person is other than who they are when they're talking to me.
So
So,
even
for
if
instance, if
even if someone is dying, if they're abusive, you're not going to treat them like they're not.
I would ignore comments, but I wouldn't. So, say if somebody said "I love you so much" and I knew that to be not true, I would I would not engage in that.
Okay, fair enough. So when you
It's hard to say. I don't know. It's
so when you saw how Joe left his mother to die at the end of the book before we get into the dreams, how did the story of Joe and his mother make you feel?
it's really emotional. It's really hard for me to see that, and yeah, mostly sad and sort of regretful that people treat each other the way that Joe's mother treats him.
Yeah, it was, you're right, it is quite sad. And then we go into the final part of the book, which is the dreams. So we get like one reality where Joe is with Lorraine, but she's kind of like half Lorraine, half Janet. She turns into a monster, kills him. Then he's in another reality where he's with Janet, but she's abusive and he's not attracted to her, and he's thinking of sleeping with his own mother. And then we realize actually he's got COVID and he's on a ventilator and he's looking back on his life. And the Davis and Lena story were actually just dreams. That the real Davis is a porn star named Beth Stewart, who's now a comedian who's gained weight. And Alice and Eve were really his neighbors, but we don't know anything what they were like in terms of whether they were abusive to each other. That was all his imagination. And the only thing we really know is real is like Joe has been with Janet. He lost weight. He got stabbed in the eye. Even Lorraine is kind of ambiguous. It's a bit ambiguous whether she was real or not. So I'm just curious, when you got to the end, what did you think was real and what did you think was dream? No right or wrong answer to this.
I thought it was all a dream, except his mother at times seemed real. Um, Davis and Max, that story seemed like Joe's real life coming to him as a different representative story. Janet, I felt was real, but I was actually not really sure fully.
Did you think Lorraine was real?
I thought Lorraine might have been Janet.
Like a dream representation of Janet?
So like the real life Janet having like two personalities.
Hmm. So, oh, so you think he might have split Janet into two different people? So there's Janet, the lovely
Yeah.
psychopath, and then
Yeah, there's
Lorraine.
good Janet and bad Janet.
Yeah,
Abusive
that sounds like
Janet
pretty
and
good.
yeah.
Interesting. So on the last page of the book, Joe is agonizing about the fact that he thinks that when he saw Janet in his dream and she was beautiful and she looked like Audrey Horne from Twin Peaks, like this must be a dream. It must not be real because someone that beautiful wouldn't give long speeches about how what's important is on the inside. That's a cliche, like, you know. But as it turns out, Janet really is beautiful. So what did you think of that as the ending of the book?
So much felt unresolved, and I still felt compassion for Joe because his idea of self-love is so twisted, and you really feel bad for him and want someone to be there to love him.
Do you think he's going to die or do you think he'll come out of it?
I think he's gonna die.
Okay. So how did that ending of the book make you feel?
A little bit sad and confused for Joe, and uh, slightly hopeful that he was going to be all right. But it was unresolved, and a lot of the stuff was unresolved. Overall, the entire book was really, really thought provoking, and yeah, it was very sad. But yep, so yeah, I really related to a lot of people in this book, and it was really interesting read, and it was so frustrating and anxiety provoking, but it was also at the same time healing. But it was very, very nice. I try to recommend it to people.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really appreciative of the fact that you read it and you've said so many interesting things about it. So thanks for sharing all of that. And it's one of those books where people who read it tend to have really, really strong reactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and I feel like recording those is probably the best way to promote the book rather than like
Mm.
trying to do book teasers or blogs or whatever, because hearing people talk about it is like the most is like the best selling point it has, I think.